You got to win the midterms, because if we don't win the midterms, it's just going to be, I mean, they'll find a reason to impeach me. I'll get impeached. We don't impeach them. You know why? Because they're meaner than we are. We should have impeached Joe Biden for 100 different things. They are mean and smart, but fortunately for you, they have horrible policy.
All right, buckle up, because Washington, D.C. is absolutely on.
Something just broke, and it wasn't accidental. This crossed a line. What we are witnessing right now in Washington, D.C. is not politics as usual. It is not standard partisan bickering, and it is certainly not the normal friction of a divided government. This moment will age badly for anyone who tries to minimize it. We have reached a point of inflection that historians often warn about, but contemporaries rarely recognize until it is too late. We are watching the active disintegration of the barrier between political speech and physical violence, and for the first time in this chaotic era, the political immune system of the United States Congress appears to be kicking in, but the question remains whether it is kicking in fast enough to save the patient. Here is where this turns serious. We are looking at a situation where the legislative branch of the United States government is effectively under siege, not by a foreign power, but by the rhetoric of the executive. We are talking about members of Congress, sitting lawmakers charged with the oversight of the federal government, openly demanding that Donald Trump resign. And pay attention to this detail. This is not just the Democratic caucus. This is not just the opposition party doing what the opposition party does. We are seeing what is being described as a genuine bipartisan coalition, a group that includes Republicans who have previously remained silent, now calling for Trump to step down immediately. This is happening because the temperature didn't just rise. The containment vessel cracked. This comes in the immediate aftermath of a congressional hearing that was widely described as a bombshell, a hearing that went completely off the rails and exposed vulnerabilities that the former president evidently could not tolerate. But the story isn't the hearing itself. The story is the reaction. Following this hearing, Trump unleashed a response that was not a defense, not a rebuttal, but an absolutely furious offensive that some lawmakers are now saying crosses the bright red line into criminal incitement and witness intimidation. We are talking about specific, targeted threats against members of Congress. We are talking about Capitol Police having to increase security details for elected officials because the threat environment has spiked vertically in the last 48 hours. And we are talking about a growing number of lawmakers saying unequivocally that enough is enough. The vibes of a constitutional crisis are not just in the air, they are the air. We need to break down exactly what happened, why this specific outburst triggered such a massive recoil, and why this could be the beginning of a real impeachment proceeding or a 25th Amendment showdown. But to understand the magnitude of this, you have to understand the sequence. It started on Capitol Hill with a hearing. This was routine oversight on paper, the kind of budget or administrative review that usually barely makes the evening news. But this one exploded. The details of exactly what triggered the former president are still being pieced together by analysts. But what we know is that during or immediately after this hearing, the testimony struck a nerve. It likely involved evidence that was damaging, personal, or legally perilous. And Trump went ballistic. This wasn't a standard grievance airing. We are talking about a furious online tirade, a rapid-fire series of social media posts containing language that legal experts and lawmakers alike are describing as threatening. He didn't just attack their policies, he attacked their safety. He used phrases like, "Patriots know what to do." He targeted specific individuals who had questioned him. And in the ecosystem of MAGA extremism, that language is not interpreted as metaphor. It is interpreted as a marching order. And here is the part no one is downplaying anymore. It worked. The language used by Donald Trump led directly to actual credible death threats against members of Congress. This is not speculation. This is the assessment of federal law enforcement. Real threats, serious enough that the Capitol Police had to scramble assets to protect the lives of American representatives. Senior Republicans, men and women who have spent years making excuses for Trump's rhetoric, reportedly called the situation intolerable. When you have members of Congress receiving death threats because the de facto leader of the Republican Party is painting targets on their backs online, that crosses a line that even political cowardice cannot ignore. So now we have this explosive situation. A bombshell hearing triggered a presidential meltdown, which led to threats against lawmakers, which has now snowballed into over 100 House members and multiple senators calling for resignation. The political analysis channels are calling this a rupture. They are packaging it as Congress demanding Trump's resignation as recordings and testimony go public. Some are tying it to explosive material like Epstein-related testimony or classified records evidence being played in Congress as the final straw. The details vary depending on the source, but the core narrative is consistent. A hearing went sideways, Trump lost control, and now a significant portion of Congress wants him gone. But is this real? Is this actually going somewhere, or is this just symbolic posturing? Because we have to be honest about the mechanics of power. Congress does not have a simple resign button they can push. They can call for resignation all they want. But Donald Trump does not have to listen, and history suggests he never will. What they can do is impeach him. What they can do is pressure the cabinet to invoke the 25th Amendment. What they can do is censure him or make his political existence so toxic that governing becomes impossible. But actually forcing him out requires a specific constitutional process, and that is where this gets really interesting. If over 100 House members are serious, and if Republicans are truly breaking ranks, we could be headed for another impeachment. And this time, with Republicans involved from the jump, it might actually look different. The story of how we got from a routine congressional hearing to members of Congress demanding the president resign is wild, and understanding the sequence helps explain why this feels so different from previous Trump controversies. This isn't just Democrats being mad. This isn't just partisan opposition. This is what is being described as a constitutional crisis, triggered by Trump's own behavior and the response from lawmakers who are genuinely concerned about their physical safety and the basic functioning of the federal government. Let's dig into the Republicans here. This is the signal within the noise. According to political commentary and analysis circulating widely right now, more than 120 members of the House have either signed letters or made public statements demanding Trump resign immediately. 120. That is a massive number. But what makes this significant is the composition of that group. We aren't just seeing the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. We aren't just seeing the usual suspects. We are talking about moderate Republicans, people who have generally supported Trump, or at least stayed quiet to avoid a primary challenge. They are now saying he needs to step down. They are citing cascading scandals and chaos. They are arguing that Congress cannot function under threat. They are arguing that Trump has become a danger to democratic governance itself. And it is not just the House. At least 7 senators are reportedly either explicitly backing resignation or signaling they would support impeachment if Trump refuses to step down. 7 senators willing to go on record or signal their position on something this explosive tells you how serious this has gotten. In the Senate, which is a far more deliberative and cautious body, 7 defections is an avalanche. The narrative coming out of Washington right now is that Congress is essentially giving Trump a last chance, resign voluntarily, or face a full impeachment trial. And the fact that this includes Republicans, the fact that members of his own party are breaking ranks, creates a permission structure for others to follow. Now let's talk about what actually pushed this over the edge, because Trump has had plenty of controversies before. He has weathered scandals that would have ended any other political career in minutes. But this feels different. A big part of what is different is the specificity of the threat. According to multiple reports and commentary, Trump's social media response included threatening language directed at specific lawmakers, posts saying things like, "Patriots know what to do," language that lawmakers and Capitol Police interpreted as incitement. This is where the legal reality crashes into the political reality. Incitement is difficult to prove in a court of law, but in the court of congressional opinion, the standard is safety. When the President of the United States targets a specific lawmaker, and hours later that lawmaker receives credible death threats, the cause and effect is undeniable. Senior Republicans reportedly called the situation intolerable because they know that if they do nothing, and if violence actually occurs, they are complicit. They are looking at a future where they cannot hold hearings, they cannot investigate, and they cannot vote without fearing for their lives. That is not a legislature. That is a hostage situation. So now we've got this explosive dynamic where a hearing triggered a meltdown which led to threats, which led to a revolt. The political analysis channels are calling this DC on fire. They are suggesting that the dam is breaking. And here is the big question everyone is asking. Is this the end of the line, or is this just another chapter in the chaos? Because here is the thing. Congress can demand resignation, but Trump feeds on conflict. He does not view this as a signal to leave. He likely views it as proof that he is the victim. However, the mechanism of impeachment is the wild card. If the House moves to impeach, and if those 7 senators hold firm, the math starts to get very dangerous for Donald Trump. Conviction requires 2/3 of the Senate. We aren't there yet, but the distance between where we are now and where we need to be for conviction is shrinking faster than it ever has before. Let's talk about the constitutional mechanics here, because calling for resignation sounds dramatic, but we need to know what levers are actually being pulled. Congress has options. First, they can pass non-binding resolutions calling for resignation. These don't force anything, but they send a political message that isolates the president. Second, they can censure Trump, which is an official rebuke. Again, legally toothless, but politically scarring. Third, and this is the nuclear option, they can impeach him. The House can vote on articles of impeachment, and if a majority votes yes, Trump gets impeached and faces a trial in the Senate. Trump has been down this road twice. Both times, the Republican Party held the line. Both times, the Senate acquitted him because the political cost of convicting him was seen as too high. But this time, if Republicans are already calling for resignation, if senators are signaling they would support impeachment, the calculus has changed. The fear of Trump's base is being outweighed by the fear of Trump's chaos. There is also the 25th Amendment option. This is where the cabinet, led by the vice president, declares the president unable to perform his duties and removes him. It is designed for physical incapacitation, a stroke, or a coma, but legal scholars have long argued it could apply if a president is behaving in ways that make governing impossible, if his judgment is so impaired by rage or delusion that he presents a danger to the republic. The problem is that Trump appointed the cabinet. Getting his own loyalists to turn on him is a steep hill to climb. But if the pressure builds, if the calls for resignation turn into a full-blown national crisis, loyalties can shift very quickly in Washington. What is fueling this beyond the immediate hearing? Context matters. Trump is already under massive legal pressure. Asset seizure threats in New York, multiple criminal cases, civil judgments, financial problems. The walls were already closing in. This outburst was not a sign of strength, it was a sign of stress. And on top of that, there are reports of deep divisions within the Republican Party. Senators breaking with Trump on foreign policy. House Republicans privately worrying that he is dragging down their narrow majority. Donors getting nervous. Suburban voters turning away. The party is fracturing, and these resignation calls might be the clearest sign yet that the establishment is trying to cut the cord. There is also the issue of the material itself. If the hearing involved Epstein-related testimony or classified records, as some are suggesting, that adds a layer of radioactive toxicity to the mix. If damaging information was made public, if there were recordings or documents that made Trump look compromised or criminal, that explains the ferocity of the response. The specifics are still emerging, but the implication is that something substantial happened in that room, something that changed the political calculation for over 100 lawmakers. And then there is the timing. We are looking at the midterms approaching. Republicans are looking at the map. They are calculating whether sticking with Trump helps or hurts them. Democrats are looking at an opportunity to tie every Republican to this chaos. And lawmakers from both parties are calculating whether staying quiet or speaking up is better for their survival. For some, especially those in competitive districts, calling for resignation is the lifeboat. It lets them distance themselves from the violence while claiming the moral high ground. So here is where we stand. A hearing exploded into crisis. Trump responded with language that led to death threats. Over 100 House members and multiple senators are calling for him to resign. The narrative is that Congress is giving Trump a last chance. And for the first time, there is real bipartisan momentum. Whether that momentum leads to removal remains to be seen. But the fact that we are even at this point, the fact that Republicans are breaking ranks in significant numbers, tells you this is different. This isn't just noise, it's a signal. And this brings us to the fundamental question of accountability. We have been here before. Investigations, impeachments, trials. Trump is still standing. But the tone of this revolt is different because the stakes are physical. This isn't about a phone call to Ukraine. This isn't about accounting fraud. This is about whether members of the United States Congress can go to work without being murdered by a radicalized mob incited by the president. That is a visceral, primal motivation. It cuts through the partisanship. When you see moderate Republicans risking their careers to sign these letters, pay attention. They are not doing it for likes on Twitter. They are doing it because they have seen the security briefings. They are doing it because they know that if they don't act, the next time the president tweets, "Patriots know what to do," the result might not just be a threat, it might be a tragedy. This is an institutional stress test of the highest order. The system is blinking red. Understanding this now matters more than reacting later. The signs of political decay are often visible long before the collapse, but only if you are willing to look at them directly. We are looking at them now. The bipartisan nature of this revolt is the key indicator. If that coalition holds, if those numbers grow, we are entering uncharted territory. If it crumbles, we are back to the status quo of dangerous escalation. But right now, in this moment, Washington is not ignoring this. The breaking point has arrived. Stay alert. These moments don't announce themselves twice. Let's strip away the noise and look at the machinery, because this is where the emotional outrage meets the cold, hard steel of the Constitution. We are hearing unprecedented demands for resignation. It sounds decisive. It feels like a solution. However, in the intricate architecture of the American presidency, a demand for resignation is legally meaningless. The President of the United States does not serve at the pleasure of the Congress. He is not a prime minister who falls when he loses a vote of no confidence. He serves a fixed term that can only be severed by specific grind-heavy constitutional gears. We need to talk about those gears because right now, Washington is trying to figure out if they still work. The first mechanism is impeachment. We have been down this road twice. We know the potholes. We know the partisan trenches. But the political calculus has fundamentally shifted. In the previous trials, the Republican wall was solid concrete. Today, we are seeing structural fractures. When you have reports of 7 Republican senators signaling they are open to conviction, that is not a leak. That is a dam breaking. 7 is certainly not 67, the number needed for removal. But in the unspoken language of the Senate, 7 is a signal to the rest of the conference that protection is no longer mandatory. It tells the donor class that the investment has become toxic. It tells the caucus that survival might require betrayal. Then there is the 25th Amendment. This is being whispered about in corridors where it was previously taboo. This specific amendment was designed as a medical fail-safe for a comatose leader, not a political remedy designed for a chaotic one. However, the legal argument is evolving in real time. Constitutional scholars and even some conservative legal minds are now arguing that inability to discharge the powers and duties of the office includes a behavioral collapse where the president turns the federal security apparatus against the legislative branch. If the commander-in-chief cannot be trusted with the nuclear codes or the National Guard because he might direct them inward, he is incapacitated. The hurdle here is the cabinet. These are loyalists. Asking them to remove the man who appointed them is a high bar. But if the security situation deteriorates, if the threats turn into active skirmishes, self-preservation kicks in. But we must be clear-eyed about the obstacle. Donald Trump does not resign. It is antithetical to his psychology. He does not retreat, he escalates. That forces Congress into a binary and brutal existential choice. Execute a removal process that tears the country apart, or accept that the executive branch has gone rogue and try to survive until the next election. This creates a crisis of governance that paralyzes the nation. How does a government fund its military, pass a budget, or respond to a foreign crisis when the legislature cannot physically convene without fear of the executive? This is not gridlock. It is a hostage situation. The machinery of state requires a baseline of cooperation to function. That baseline has been incinerated. We are watching the gears grind against each other without oil, generating heat that threatens to melt the engine block entirely. The endgame here isn't just about whether Trump stays or goes. It is about whether the fragile constitutional guardrails can withstand a direct kinetic impact. The moderate Republicans signing these letters are doing the math for the 2026 midterms. They realize that a party tethered to a leader who incites violence against his own colleagues is a party facing electoral extinction. They are looking for an off-ramp. Impeachment is the emergency exit. The question is no longer if they want to use it, but if they have the courage to open the door while the building is still on fire. The system was built for checks and balances, not for a stress test of this magnitude. We are finding out in real time if the blueprint holds.